You're listening to WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
Check, check, 1, 2. Look like a little country, some rock and roll and blues. 'Cause we sure love playing for good people like you. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, check, 1, 2.
Welcome to Music Local and Sustainable, the radio show that features discussions with and the music of local musicians. I am your host, Dave Lake. Tonight, I am talking with jazz musician and music equipment entrepreneur Jody Espina in the performance space of the Jody Jazz Factory. Welcome, Jody Espina.
Thanks so much for having me.
First, let's talk a little bit about your musical journey.
I started playing when I was 12 years old, actually 11 with the recorder in the 6th grade. And years later I realized that beginning was very important to my musical journey because I learned ear training with the recorder. The next year I wanted to play saxophone in the band. We had a clarinet, and so I played clarinet. And I took to it right away. I got a sax the next year, played clarinet and sax all the way through. By 14, I knew I wanted to be a musician. At 15, I was playing gigs in Tampa, Florida, and never had a regular job again in my life. So at that time, even 14, I knew I wanted to study 2 years at University of South Florida in Tampa, classical clarinet for the discipline, although I loved jazz. That was what I loved. So, and then go to Berkeley in Boston, which I did, and I graduated Berkeley in 1983, and nothing was happening. There were no gigs. I didn't want to sit around in Boston and do nothing, so I got a rail pass and traveled through Europe, and toward the end of this long month traveling all over Europe, I went to Barcelona, and I knew some people there that taught at a music school patterned after Berkeley. And they hired me to direct the big band and teach classes, teach ensembles. So I just fell into this crazy thing. I lived 2 years in Barcelona. Taught, played all over the country with a bunch of musicians, and really I was kind of homesick. In a way, I was a little bit of a big fish in a small pond at that time. The level worldwide now has gone up so much. You can go to any city in the world and you'll find good players. At that time, there were some good players, but it was very different. So my eyes, were always, even from 14, the plan was USF, Berkeley, New York City. And so I went to New York City. In between, I went on the road with the Tommy Dorsey Band. My musical journey was pretty lucky from the teachers that I ran into all the way up. Even in Tampa when I was 13, I had a great teacher named Junie Farrell. I studied at the store with him, but he wanted to give me extra time, so he asked the owner, can he teach me at his house? So he'd give me an hour here or there. We did sax quartets. It was interesting learning to improvise with him. He had me practice my chords, scales, and arpeggios and know them up and down, but when we went to improvise, he didn't give me the chord changes. He'd give me the melody of a song, and everything else was by ear. And he really said very little. And then when I got to college in USF, really studied the chord changes. And the whole difficulty in improvisation is getting locked in to the chord changes. You feel you're trying to make all these weaving in and out of the chord changes. You're not really listening to the melodies in your head. So that's that very difficult thing with improv, being just listening to the melodies, but then also dealing with all these changing chords that are shifting every measure. The whole part is trying to lose that ego. I call it the ego. It's this checking part of checking in, like, oh, that wasn't cool, or oh, that's so-and-so's in the audience, you can't play like that, or all this stuff. Actually, I've practiced shutting that part of the brain in the closet. Kenny Werner wrote a great book called Effortless Mastery, and it's pretty much all about that.
Now, let's listen to a couple of tunes. First, Jody Espina is playing the clarinet on the song Going to Study War No More, or you may know it as Down by the Riverside, from the album Standards, along with Rob Henke on trumpet, Rolf Sturm on guitar, Jim Whitney on acoustic bass, and Scott Newman on percussion. Now, Jody is on the saxophone, playing the song Epilogue from guitarist Jackson Evans' album Song Noir, with basses Ben Wells and drummer Stuart White, and of course, Jackson Evans on guitar. Tonight, I am talking with jazz musician and music equipment entrepreneur Jody Espina. How did you get into the manufacture of mouthpieces?
After Spain, I went to New York City and pursued my dream of being a jazz musician, and of course ended up doing every musical thing you can imagine. I played all kind of gigs, everything you can imagine, from Broadway to weddings to rock gigs at CBGB's and all those clubs downtown, big bands. The way I got into manufacturing was through a fluke. I started doing this book called The Artist's Way, and it had me on this different path than I would ever have been on. It was a more creative path and going toward energy regardless of what it might bring to you financially. If it felt good, creative, fun, go for it. So through that, I met Santi Runyon, who was a mouthpiece maker. Just wanted to be around him because of his energy. And I asked him if I could study with him. It wasn't so much studying saxophone, it was just kind of hanging out with him. He had been in Chicago and played Al Capone's speakeasies, played for all famous people. He taught Charlie Parker some lessons. He's an amazing guy. So he invited me to play his 93rd birthday party, and I picked out one of his mouthpieces in his factory to play at his party. And I got to hang out with him for a few days, and I think we bonded. I got back to New York playing that mouthpiece, and I called him 3 months later and said, I can't really play the mouthpiece anymore. It's not giving me enough bottom in the sound. It's not free blowing enough. And he said, well, why don't you come back and I'll reface it for you. That's kind of customize it. So I did, and it's something that I wouldn't have done without going through this path of the artist's way and just going for things. When I did go down there, he refaced it. It played amazing. Just some things with sandpaper and a file on the same mouthpiece. Boom. And I said, I love it. And he said, well, we can make that for you, Jody, and call it Jody Jazz. So I said, thanks a lot. And I just thought I would maybe sell a few to my students. I thought the name was goofy, but I wasn't going to say anything. So people started to hear about this on the internet, on saxophone forums, and started to want to buy them. So it was a big deal to me the way he did that customization, and I had never seen that before, and it fascinated me. So I built a company, and the next several years I was in New York City, and I'd travel 7 times a year down to Louisiana, work all day in his factory, and then I'd hang out with him at night in his studio. And we would play a little bit, I'd ask questions about mouthpieces, and it was just an amazing thing. The company ended up letting me realize my true dreams that I was thinking about in doing this artist's way. So, which was traveling around the world, playing music. It was helping people. I get to donate mouthpieces to schools who can't afford them. And it allowed me also kind of financially feel confident enough to have a family. So.
What were your musical inspirations? Who or what inspired you musically?
The first thing was, we had about 6 jazz records in my house. The first one was a clear red LP, Benny Goodman with the Brussels Orchestra. And it sounded like his orchestra. The band was really good. I was playing clarinet in 7th grade, and one day I tried to hit this note that he hit on the end of a tune. It was a high G, way up. I didn't know how to do it, and I finally hit that note. I was hooked. I loved that record. I just wore it out. Early influences were so strange. It went from Benny Goodman to Boots Randolph to Ornette Coleman. I know I was listening to Cannonball and Miles and Kind of Blue, and I liked Dolphy, Eric Dolphy early on. And we had a great radio station in Tampa. It was the USF station. Played a fantastic mix of everything. So that was part of my big education musically. That was indispensable. Typical guys, but I was a rebel without a cause in a way, and I didn't want to sound like Charlie Parker because I thought everybody tried to. Of course, then I had to deal with Charlie Parker later on. Actually, when I graduated and I got to New York and I had to really get my bebop together, that's when I had to deal with Charlie Parker.
Here is an Ornette Coleman tune, Congeniality, with Ornette Coleman on the sax, Don Cherry on the cornet, Charlie Hayden on bass, and Billy Higgins on the drums. tonight I am talking with jazz musician and music equipment entrepreneur Jody Espina. Now, you mentioned Ornette Coleman as being an early influence.
Yeah.
He used your mouthpieces.
Yeah, it was one of the thrills of my life. And I went to his apartment on, I think it's 36th Street. We hung out all day that day. So we ate soup together, we played each other's horns. He didn't even have a saxophone strap. He had something from a camera bag. I have this saxophone strap that this guy gives me, Brancher from France, he makes, and I gave that to Ornette. And he loved a couple of my metal mouthpieces, and it was so cool. He said the nicest things to me about the mouthpieces and what they did. He said, I can play faster now. We have a way of measuring mouthpieces, and the mouthpiece he was playing doesn't even measure right. It was so ill-formed, but he played a very soft reed, and you can kind of will allow some stuff. But so when he put those mouthpieces on mine, it was like boing. And he tried to tell me his theory of music, which is so out there. It went over my head, but we sat down on a love seat. He had this really cool loft apartment. In the big room, it was set up to listen to music. 2 speakers, stereo console, and a love seat. That was it. We sat on that and we listened to some of my CDs that I was on. And at one point he goes, you should play this music where they drink beer. He was always saying the strangest things. Came down to my apartment. I had a loft in Tribeca. He said, this is like a park in here. Just everything hanging out with him was so amazing. He always dressed really sharp. He dressed like an artist, like Ornette Coleman. I asked him, did you ever do anything for money? He said, not yet.
You manufacture a mouthpiece. What goes into the manufacture of a mouthpiece? And how do mouthpieces vary?
Well, first, whenever I say I make saxophone mouthpieces, people automatically, 80% of the people say, oh, you mean the reed? And they say, no. The reed is the bamboo part, so people get confused because they think the mouthpiece, that's at the end of the saxophone and you put your mouth on it. Most people maybe think that just comes with the instrument. That's part of the instrument. But it's a variable part. So it has a bamboo reed on it that vibrates and makes a sound. If you think about in an orchestra and you think about the sound of a clarinet or you think about the sound of the flute, you can imagine that sound in your head, and from one orchestra to the next, that sound that's going to come when you have a flute player or a clarinet player playing a solo, it's going to be pretty homogeneous. It's going to be within a certain range, very similar. Then when you think about the saxophone and you think about the range of sounds that have been made through the history of the saxophone or the history of jazz, for example, history of rock and roll, it's a wide variety of sounds. You could have the Guy Lombardo Orchestra playing Auld Lang Syne. You could have Boots Randolph playing Yakety Sax, which was the Benny Hill theme that some people know it from that. Junior Walker playing Shotgun. Coltrane playing My Favorite Things. Charlie Parker playing Bird with Strings. Beautiful sound. There's so many different sounds that people have made on a saxophone. So we can make mouthpieces that can facilitate those sounds. They can be more close to that sound that you want. If you're playing in a rock and roll band, everybody on stage has knobs. The drummer might not have knobs, but he has big sticks. And you don't have any. When I say knobs, I mean knobs that go up to 10. So they can keep turning louder, and they always do. As the set goes on, as the night goes on, they get louder and louder. On an acoustic instrument, you don't have any knobs. In a wind instrument, it's all your wind. So we can make a mouthpiece that can help you cut through that, play louder, but give you a good sound. The biggest thing that changes in the mouthpiece is the inside shapes. We change the way, the curve where the reed vibrates on. A lot of little different things. When you play a mouthpiece that feels good to you, I think it's like kissing your soulmate. It just feels so good. And it makes you want to play more. It makes, when the band stops, you still want to play because you love your sound and you love how it feels. And when you don't play that, it's totally the opposite. Everything is a struggle. You're fighting everything. Nothing comes out. When you get it right, that can happen. It can feel, it's like a dream.
You've described young band players coming in with their saxophone and whatever mouthpiece they got when they bought the saxophone. And then they try out one of your mouthpieces and you can see it on their face.
Yeah. And I wish I'd been taking videos of this all along. And I had that reaction 1,000 times.
Up on your website.
Yeah, I love it. And they go, wow, their eyes go like this, and they look at their friends and they can't believe it. Oh man, I got to start doing that. If people could see that, that would be the commercial in itself. There would be no need to talk. So it's a great thing. It's a great thing. And it's funny, sometimes it's the professionals who have the most trouble. They might be playing a terrible mouthpiece. They didn't go out and try a lot of things, and then they'll see it, and sometimes they won't go for it. They won't buy it, and I have to say, what are you doing? You have to learn to invest in yourself. I know when it's right, and I know when they're making a big mistake. Usually they go for it, but musicians, that's part of this artist way thing that I was talking about before. As musicians, we're conditioned not to make any money. We're conditioned to be careful, to not go for things because we're afraid. And this is breaking out of that and going for the positive energy.
So how does the nature of a mouthpiece change the sound of the saxophone?
We have a morphology, human beings, that's our physical makeup. And in a mouthpiece and playing, the most important parts are your mouth, your lips, the chamber, your soft palate, your tongue, the shape of it, the size of it, and then how you blow, what's happening in your throat. All of that is a certain thing. Then we need to match that up with the mouthpiece that directs your air in the right way. So we can change the shapes inside the mouthpiece, the size of the chamber. We can change, like I say, the facing curve lets the reed vibrate a certain way, and there are many different curve schedules.
So the reed vibrates against the mouthpiece.
Right, and it's going back and forth very fast. It has this whole path it has to take. If you grab the mouthpiece in one place as opposed to another, one curve might work better for you than another. That's just one part of it. It's really interesting. Band directors want to say, my whole saxophone section should play the same mouthpiece so we can sound the same. I've stopped fighting them on it, but all your kids are different. All your saxophones are different. Different brands, different. The neck of the saxophone is the second most important thing. It's what you put the mouthpiece on. It really influences the sound. A lot of people don't know that. So, and the reed is really important. The reed can influence the sound a lot. But basic shapes inside the mouthpiece are the biggest influencer of the sound. A bigger shape inside makes a warmer, rounder sound. You can, we have chambers called horseshoe, square, round, a lot of different shapes, and we have step baffles, all kind of things. Most saxophone players don't know any of this. Just like I don't know anything about the car engine under the hood.
So, could we hear some of the differences between different mouthpieces?
Sure. So this is my DV. It stands for Da Vinci, and I have a patent in this mouthpiece. It's very high-end mouthpiece. It's 24 karat gold plated, made out of brass. I was trying to figure out how to make a mouthpiece that was loud enough to play on live gigs so you could hear yourself and other people could hear you, but that didn't have a shrill sound. You have to make the chamber inside the mouthpiece very small, and then you get a louder, brighter sound, but you get a shrill sound. So in reading the Da Vinci Code, the novel, they talked about the golden mean proportions. And that led me to think about what if I use that. Those proportions are found in the Stradivarius violin, on the dolphin, on the human body. Da Vinci, when he drew that man with his arms outstretched and the circle around him. That's called the Vitruvian Man, and it describes these proportions. So I put those proportions on the mouthpiece, and it led me to this extra opening under the reed that brought in this bottom. And it's been a game changer for the company. So our company is 16 years old, but this was about 6 years into it, maybe 5 years into it or something, and I developed this mouthpiece, and it's I love it. Any good mouthpiece should be able to do a lot of sounds. That was a more or less, let's say, forte or mezzo forte. If we want to do pianissimo, mezzo piano, and a more classical sound, hopefully this mouthpiece can still do that. Or something like Paul Desmond. And that's the problem with those bright, shrill rock and roll mouthpieces. They can't do that. It sounds like fingernails on a chalkboard. That I can play softly with this mouthpiece. But we have... Did you get distortion?
Yeah, it peaked.
All right, nothing like digital distortion.
Now you see that this design gave you a bottom.
If I talk like this, you got that. There's a rah thing that a shrill mouthpiece won't have. It'll just be all eh. And that's what I was trying to get. It's something from that first mouthpiece that Santi Runyon customized for me to all my prototypes. Our brightest mouthpiece is not the DB, it's this new model called the Jet, but we fought and fought to work with it to get enough bottom in it so it was still a good sound. But not everybody wants that. Some people want a really shrill sound, and I was trying to make the brightest sound when I made the Jet, but it actually, I stopped short of that, and it became really universally liked. And it's been a great release, and it's 2 years old now, so that's what we're working on the baritone, the Jet model. So to start kind of from the beginning, I have a wooden mouthpiece from France, very big chamber. The sound, in those days there weren't people with knobs. All music was acoustic, and so the sound required was a lot softer. So this mouthpiece has a huge chamber inside. It's made out of wood. The tip opening, the distance that the reed has to travel is very small. So here's the sound of that. Actually, I'm going to put a harder reed on to make it a better trial, because since the reed doesn't have to travel very far, a harder reed works better. A reed that is more dense, it takes actually more energy to make it go. More wind, more pressure with your embouchure, with your mouth. So that's kind of the sound of that. And that's, I think, quite a bit different than the other one. And then a typical student mouthpiece, the mouthpiece that they get in the case, is designed to be soft sounding so that the band director can deal with a saxophone section, because he's got to deal with clarinets and flutes. He doesn't want those saxophones. Saxophone is a loud instrument. So the mouthpiece is designed to keep it quiet. But in jazz and popular music, we need a louder saxophone. So that's why we use these different mouthpieces, one of the reasons. So here is a typical student mouthpiece. Not too much difference than the French mouthpiece. And this French mouthpiece that I have, if you can take a look, it has teeth marks on the top there on the beak. Somebody really did a number with their teeth on this mouthpiece. It's probably over 100 years old. So then here's my Jet, which is a bright mouthpiece on the edge of as bright as I want to get. When I say bright, I mean more highs, more high partials of harmonics in the sound, as if you had an EQ on your stereo and you put all the highs up. And that helps you when you're playing, again, with contemporary rock and things. The highs let you cut through more. It has a shorter facing curve. It's a different facing curve. I know this is getting technical, but that part of the facing curve helps me play altissimo. So altissimo means very high notes they're not normal on the saxophone, almost like altered techniques. Oh yeah, I'm playing this hard reed now. I gotta go back to the soft reed. I thought, wow, this is too hard to play. So every mouthpiece kind of you can fit just the right reed. Most of what I do when I travel is educate. I'm trying to teach people some of these things that they wouldn't know. People don't go out and try mouthpieces. They don't know a lot about reeds or don't like that one.
So when you demonstrate at a show, you talk about the mouthpiece, the reed, the combination, and demonstrate it.
Yes, usually in my clinics that I do, I'll do tone production. I'll talk a lot about tone apart from the mouthpieces. How you can work your tone, develop the sound that you want, techniques of breathing, sound development, and then I'll get into mouthpieces. Just talk in general about the differences, what you can look for, how to try a mouthpiece. It's not a hard sell at all. It's more, like I say, education. But I'll go into the models and try and point a little bit toward that. So altissimo begins. Here's the first altissimo note. Then normally most saxophone players can play that high. That's about it. It's kind of depends on the time of day here. All right, so that's a little bit of difference in sounds. My hard rubber is our traditional jazz piece that you would think of, maybe could play in a big band from the 50s to up to today. It's our most popular piece with the jet nipping at its heels.
Now, which of these mouthpieces comes closest to the original Jody Jazz?
Well, the original was Santis Runyon's mouthpiece that he customized for me, and then I went into the factory and worked that on all the ones. The jet is actually closest, and I feel the sound of the jet has this purity that I really like. It's got a bigness and enough bottom, but with this power. It's a really cool mouthpiece, and it's more expensive than maybe the average mouthpiece, but not by that much. Our DV is quite a bit more expensive, but they're in a lot of high schools and colleges all over the place. It allows us to be in that market because we are kind of known as a high-end mouthpiece company, but the plan always was to try and be in the school market. Education has always been just part of me, so I really love going to the schools and seeing the kids. People would be amazed at the band programs out there and the niceness of the kids. They go all over the place, and these kids are just good kids. If you're a parent, you want your kid in band. That's the kids you want your kids hanging out with. Those are the nice kids.
Tonight, I am talking with jazz musician and music equipment entrepreneur Jody Espina. Now, you mentioned earlier about the benefits of music and music education.
Yes.
What are your feelings about the state of music education these days?
I'm very in it because part of my business is school bands, and so I go around the country. My goal is to meet as many band directors as possible, get into the band rooms. I see so many positive things. In the recession of 2009, the band and orchestra business was the actually best in the whole music industry. We hear a lot about bands being cut and things, but the band boosters come up, the parents are supporting. There's a lot of strong programs around the country, and I think people are starting to get it. So it's a no-brainer. It's like exercise. It's a no-brainer. We need to have the kids exercising, and we need to have the kids, I say, playing music and art. All of it. Acting, painting, all of it. But it's just, I know it's hard to fit it in, but music makes the brain better. And it teaches something that's, sports are great as well. They teach you how to work together. But music is non-competitive. It teaches a teamwork that's non-competitive. Sometimes in bands they have competition for chairs and things, but when you're playing and the whole band lines up, and this can happen in a beginning band or in a symphony orchestra, a professional orchestra, and it happens no more necessarily in the professional orchestra than it does in the beginning band, which is the special moment that crystallizes and everybody's playing together. Everybody forgets themselves for a moment and the music's just working. Everybody gets goosebumps. It's about goosebumps for me. Everything is about goosebumps for me.
So what are some of your present collaborations?
As far as music, I play down at Rancho Alegre every Friday and Saturday, and we've had that almost 5 years. So we play with Bill Smith, Mitch Hennis, Maggie Evans, and we feature drums twice a month there. So we add to the trio, we add the quartet. It's been really successful for Rancho Alegre. He wouldn't have us for 5 years if it hasn't been financially good for him. We just need more live music, and that's a societal issue.
What do you think could promote live music here in Savannah?
I think there's enough people out here. We just need to have some club owners who put the thought behind it and give it the space to get the legs, to get the wind in the sail. You have to work at it. You can't just put some musicians there and let them play for 3 weeks and then stop. You've got to work. You got to do your work. From doing this business, we're packed every weekend at Rancho Alegre's. But even still, anytime I'm in a hotel in Savannah, I always go over to the concierge and say hello and talk about what we do. It's promoting. Always be promoting. If you get music, you got to promote it. That's all I'm saying is find a place that feels good to have music and then work it and be committed to it for at least 6 months. Because some people start it and stop it. And the musicians can't rely on the club owner to do it all, and the club owner can't rely on the musicians to do it all. They both have to do it together and work together.
What do you think about the local music festivals that feature jazz?
The Jazz Festival is a gem that Savannah has that they don't appreciate, because it's one of the few in the country that's a free festival. Nobody has to pay anything to see music for a whole week. And it's one of the few things that give, in that first half of the week, all local musicians a chance to play. The Savannah Music Festival is a great festival, but doesn't really do anything for the local music scene. And I take issue with that, and I would like to see them spend a little bit of money and sprinkle the squares with music, some free concerts, so that we could make it a musical city where they're happening by chance upon all these little musical events. And for a festival of this size, they can afford it easily to make a much more musical happen. So with the free festival, you have 3 or 4 concerts every night, 3 or 4 bands, and then you have the big things in the park on the weekend, and then you have a jam session. It's late at night, the jam sessions, but that's a real scene. That's old school jam session. And usually the famous musicians who play on the weekend come over, and then the younger players, the college kids, and the local players, they all get to mix it up, and it's usually really fun. So I just like to see the city wake up to the jazz festival. It's the one event that I know of that brings more people of different backgrounds together, and I love that. And that's what I love about Rancho Alegre too.
You have played with unusual groups of musicians. What's an example of this?
One of my best friends is from New York, Rolf Sturm. We have a trio with a trumpet player, Rob Henke. It's an unusual trio without bass, and but whenever we play, no matter if it's been a year since we've seen each other, it always clicks, and that people don't think that trio is going to sound good. As soon as they hear it, they forget about bass. It just works.
This group of Jody Espina on saxophone, Rob Henke on trumpet and alto horn, and Rolf Sturm on acoustic guitar is called Tricycle. And here from their eponymous album is the tune Slow Dance. Well, I want to thank you so very much for being on the show.
Thank you so much. It was really enjoyable. I appreciate you putting this attention on the local music scene. There are some great players here, and coming out and hearing live music is not just about hearing the music, it's about getting with your community, seeing people. Savannah's a great little small town that you can go out and probably run into somebody you know, and sometimes it was just pushing ourselves out the door, and we're always glad we did.
Let's wrap up with Somebody Loves Me, featuring Jody Espina on clarinet. This is from the Jews and Jazz in America at the Mikveh Israel Synagogue, with Stephen Bryan on piano, Linus Enochson on bass, Jackson Evans on guitar, and Ira Miller on drums. This has been another edition of Music Local and Sustainable, and I've been your host, Dave Lake. Save this time for another show next week.
Well, I know we ain't headed for the Hall of Fame. Gonna give it what we got, man, that ain't no shame. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, check, 1, 2. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, check, 1,